A police drone was circling a trail near a midtown Anchorage apartment complex on a Thursday evening when its camera settled on something that didn't belong. A pillow, pale against the dark of a storm drain. Officers walked to the spot, crouched and lifted the lid. There was blood dried on the rim, and beneath that pillow, 4 or 5 feet down, was the body of a 21-year-old woman who had been reported missing 4 days earlier by the man she'd married 8 months before. Her name was Saria Hildabrand, and the terrible arithmetic of this case is that she had been lying there, roughly 100 yards from her own front door, the entire time her husband was helping strangers look for her. She had not been placed there carelessly. Around her, investigators found bedding, a pillow, a sheet, a blanket, and a pair of tan military gloves. On the trail nearby sat a brand new 96-gallon wheeled rubbish bin, stained a telltale red-brown. The gunshot wound was above her left temple. Anchorage police took her husband into custody that same night, the 10th of August 2023. By the next morning he was charged with murder in the first degree, murder in the second, and tampering with physical evidence, held on $500,000 bail. To understand who Saria Barney was, you have to look at the choices she made long before she ever arrived in Alaska. Saria Barney came from Idaho by birth and Utah by upbringing. She was a Hillcrest High School graduate from Midvale with deep roots in the small San Pete County town of Mount Pleasant. Her mother, Meredith, had her young. The two of them were close in the way that comes from that. Close enough that Saria phoned home during the most ordinary errands. Walking the dog, driving to a shift, just to talk. She worked at a restaurant in Midtown Anchorage called Bread and Brew. She walked her dog around University Lake Park, her phone pressed to her ear, her mum on the other end of the line. The picture her family painted was of a young woman who was active, social, and busy building something. She was, above all else, a soldier by choice, a combat medic. She had enlisted first with the Utah Army National Guard, then served in the Alaska Army National Guard, and the move north had been deliberate. Alaska meant she could train for the role she wanted without waiting for a slot to open back home. She was ambitious about it. She wanted to help people, and she had picked the hardest, most hands-on way to do it. Think for a moment about what that job actually is. A combat medic is the soldier everyone else relies on when the very worst happens. The one who moves towards the wounded while others take cover. Saria had signed up to be that person. She had signed up for it twice, once for her country, once for her state. The people who knew her described someone warm, funny, and full of life. Her mother called her amazing and said that in the days after her death, hearing story after story from people whose lives Saria had touched brought a strange comfort in the middle of the worst of it, and she was planning her future in the most hopeful, ordinary ways. She had bought decorations for a party. She spoke to her friends every single day. She was close to her mother, and she was counting down to a family visit that was only weeks away. Meredith had plans to fly up and see her daughter's new life. None of those were the choices of a person preparing to disappear. They were the choices of a person building something. Hold on to that, because the man she had married was about to ask an entire city to believe she had simply walked away from all of it. She had also chosen a husband. Saria met Saria Hildabrand in Army basic training in 2022. He was a Kentucky kid with a hard start in life in ways that would surface much later in a courtroom. He had gone into foster care as a small boy and was adopted at the age of 8, along with siblings, by a woman named Paula. He was in uniform by 19. By 2023, he was an active-duty cannon crew member with the 2nd Infantry Brigade Combat Team of the 11th Airborne Division, stationed at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage. They married in Utah on the 29th of December 2022, with Saria's mother and stepfather present. In the new year, the newlyweds moved north together. She followed him to Alaska, and she folded her own dreams into the move: the medic program, the fresh start, the party decorations, the dog. 8 months later came his 21st birthday. The 5th of August 2023. It began small and grew heavy. A drink at the apartment. Then on to Dave & Buster's for several more. 5 or 6 beers by his own later account. Then stronger things after that. Shots. Mixed drinks with names not fit to print. Drink stacked on drink through the night, until they moved on to another venue, and a bouncer refused him entry because he was too visibly drunk to be let in. By the time they gave up on the night, according to the account he gave investigators, he was in a bad way. Not aggressive, not looking for a fight. Just done, wanting only to go to bed and sleep it off. Somewhere around 2 a.m, the group climbed into a rideshare and went home. Friends were with them for part of the night. Saria, by every description, was fine. She was not suicidal. She was not in crisis. She was a young woman coming home from her husband's birthday. That car ride is, as far as the public record goes, the last time anyone other than her husband is known to have seen Saria Hildabrand alive. From that point, only one person's account exists for what happened inside that apartment, because the other person never got the chance to give hers. So let the clock tell it. Between about 2:12 and 2:24 in the morning, a set of screenshots arrived on Saria's phone. They had been sent from Zarius's own device, and they laid his cheating bare, messages to a woman named Cheyenne back in Kentucky, and evidence of contact with other women besides. Picture that landing in the small hours of your husband's birthday, the images lighting up the screen, the slow, sick understanding of exactly what they mean and of what your marriage actually is. At roughly 2:40, Saria tried to phone a friend. The call went unanswered, and at 2:48 a.m, a neighbour was startled awake and dialed 911 to report the sound of a gunshot. Motive and gunshot, 8 minutes apart. Set beside that timeline, the husband's version is a hole where the crucial minutes should be. He said he was blackout drunk. He said he remembered nothing after the bar. He said he woke up later that morning in his boxers with no memory at all and went looking for his phone. He found the screenshots that told him his wife now knew everything. He went to speak to her, he said, and found her already dead, a single gunshot wound to her head. He woke up in his boxers, he found the screenshots, he went to confront his wife and found her already gone, but he claimed he never heard a shot, and he claimed he did not know whether he had fired one. How do you wake up and remember the boxers, the phone, the screenshots, and forget a gunshot in the same room? Let me know in the comments whether you think a blackout can actually work that way. I read them, and on this one I want to hear you. There was one more thing the phones would reveal about that morning, and it is chilling in its ordinariness. In the hours after the gunshot, while Saria lay dead in the apartment, her husband's own device kept moving. Web searches, social media. He was, the prosecution said, scrolling through his phone, looking at pornography in the same rooms where his wife's blood was soaking into the mattress. Later that day, he would search for something else too. Firearms, particular makes and models. A man, the state argued, thinking about guns on the very day one had ended his wife's life. By mid-morning, a message was moving out into the world, from Saria's phone. If the shot was the crime, the text was the crack in the story. At around 10:45 that Sunday morning, a message went from Saria's phone to her co-workers at Bread and Brew. She wouldn't be coming in. A colleague replied that she'd need to ring the owner directly to call off a shift. The reply came back that she didn't have the owner's number. Except she did. It was saved in her phone. And her co-workers knew she had used it before, because she'd rung it in the past to report an absence. The owner later confirmed his phone never rang. Whoever was thumbing out those messages was inside that apartment, wearing Saria's identity like a borrowed coat. And they didn't know it didn't fit. The lie was too well-mannered to be her, and too ignorant of her own life to be anyone but an imposter. There was a second problem, and it was worse. Her husband had told police that Saria walked to work that Sunday morning and left her phone behind at the apartment. But a phone left on the counter cannot text your boss. Confronted with that contradiction, Zarius denied sending the messages. He could not explain how they had been sent. He simply had no answer at all. That was the first thread. Once investigators pulled on it, the whole story began to come apart in their hands. While that borrowed voice was calling off work, a trail of receipts was being laid across Anchorage. That same Sunday, investigators later established, Zarius made a series of purchases. At a Fred Meyer, he bought new bedsheets, a mattress cover, hydrogen peroxide, and an empty spray bottle. At a Lowe's, he bought a 96-gallon rubbish bin on wheels. Read as a shopping list, it is a clean-up kit and a container. Surveillance cameras caught him moving through it all, standing at a self-checkout, unbothered, buying marinara sauce and a sports drink in the same unremarkable trip. A young man performing ordinary, while something unspeakable waited for him at home. The prosecutor would later stand in front of the jury, point to one of those clips, and describe him standing in the cashier line so completely untroubled by what he had done, and by what he was, in that very moment, still in the middle of doing. Callous, she called it. Calculated. Selfish. And across the early hours of that day, the phone data told the same story from another angle. He was not sitting still with his grief. He was moving. Over a mile of travel, logged around the apartment in the small hours, back and forth, doing the slow physical work of making a person disappear. He visited the drainage area twice that day, he would later admit. Once to plan it, once to carry it out. And he did not report his wife missing. Not that morning, not that afternoon, not that night. Roughly 36 hours passed before Anchorage police took a missing person report on the Monday. His explanation was that his worry had built slowly, that he went to collect her from work in the evening, learned she'd never arrived, then drove the neighborhood, rang hospitals, rang her parents, even rang the jail. He said he'd held back from calling police because he thought he might find her himself and that it would all turn out to be a misunderstanding. Then he telephoned Meredith Barney in Utah. He told his mother-in-law the story about the walk to work, the hangover, the forgotten phone. Meredith did what a mother does. She got on a plane. She and her sister landed in Alaska within the day, met the police, and threw themselves into the search for her daughter. And almost at once, something about her son-in-law unsettled her. He was, she would later testify, very paranoid and very rigid. He seemed to want to stay close to her side, and he seemed to want to steer her away from certain places she quietly made a note of, meaning to come back to them later. This became the sharpest line the prosecution would ever draw. And it is worth sitting with. Where is she? What happened? When will we find her? Those were the questions pouring out of everyone who loved Saria. Her mother, her friends, her co-workers, an entire military community that had begun to mobilize around a missing soldier. The city answered the call. Police searched, fellow soldiers searched. Volunteers combed the trails and the neighborhoods, dozens of them on a single day, walking the very paths around University Lake Park where Saria used to walk her dog. Her husband shared the missing flyer to his own Facebook page and asked people to spread it. He walked those trails alongside the searchers. Everyone was asking those 3 questions. Everyone except the one person who, the state would argue, never needed to ask them, because he already held every answer. Meredith had noticed the wrongness early, and she was not the only one. When she and her sister moved through the search, they watched where Zarius did and did not want them to go. He gave excuses. He made reasons not to help in certain directions. And the 2 women, grieving and frightened and sharper than he gave them credit for, took quiet mental notes of exactly which places he steered them away from, planning, between themselves, to go back to those places later. A mother, doing detective work on her own son-in-law, in the middle of searching for her daughter. There was another detail from those days that the prosecutor would later hand to the jury like a stone. Before Saria's body had been found, while she was still officially only missing, Zarius asked her mother what keepsakes he ought to give the family. Perhaps, he suggested, Saria's baby blanket from her childhood, and her wedding ring. He was talking about mementos of a woman he was still pretending to hope was alive. He was choosing what to bury her memory in, while insisting to her mother's face that there was still hope. Inside the apartment, the physical case was already hardening against him. When detectives first stepped in, the only bed in the home had been stripped down to a bare mattress pad, with a set of brand new sheets folded on a table nearby. Then a detective asked to look under the bed, and Zarius refused. He said there was embarrassing stuff down there. He insisted his wife could not be under the frame, because she wouldn't fit. Imagine being the detective standing in that room. You are looking for a missing woman. Her husband is blocking you from checking under his own bed, and the reason he gives you is that it's too embarrassing to search. If you were that investigator, what is the very first thing you'd have said back to him? I have a feeling we'll all land in the same place. A search warrant would soon tell the real truth. The trial opened in June 2026 in Anchorage, before Judge Peter Ramgren. It ran for around a fortnight, dozens of witnesses for the state set against a mere handful for the defense. The apartment gave up the rest of its secrets under that warrant. Beneath the stripped bedding, the mattress was soaked through with human blood, down into the carpet and into the wooden frame of the bed itself. Investigators sprayed the chemical agents that reveal blood after someone has tried to scrub it away. And the room lit up. More in the bathtub, more across the floors. The after-image of a cleanup that had never quite worked. But the forensic heart of the case came down to a distance. The state's firearms and toolmark analyst told the jury that the fatal shot had been fired from an intermediate range. Not a contact wound, where the muzzle is pressed against the skin, but somewhere between roughly 6 and 12 inches from Saria's head. Most likely near 6. The medical examiner walked the jury through the 5 recognized manners of death: natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined, and explained why this particular wound did not read as a typical suicide. The shot, the analyst said, was also angled slightly upward. That distance became the whole battleground, because on the state's evidence, a genuine self-inflicted gunshot to the head tends to leave a contact wound. This was not that. Prosecutor Brittany Dunlop drew the line for the jury as plainly as it can be drawn. Had the barrel been held against Saria's head, she said, the wound and the spray of blood would have looked markedly different, and they did not. She reminded the jury of something else too. Being blackout drunk, she told them, does not absolve a man of what his hands have done. The defense, led by Lacey Brewster, never tried to paint their client as clean. They conceded the lies. They conceded the hiding of the body. Their entire argument lived inside a single word: manner. Nobody disputed that Saria had died from a gunshot wound to the head. But whether that shot was homicide, suicide, or a terrible accident was, they argued, genuinely uncertain. And where there is reasonable doubt about the manner of a death, they told the jury, there is reasonable doubt about whether anyone caused it at all. Mistakes, Brewster said, are not the same thing as murder. It was a careful argument. It rested entirely on that gap, the space between what he had clearly done afterwards and what could actually be proven about the moment of the shot itself. But the state had one more question waiting, and it was devastatingly simple. If Saria had taken her own life, or if the gun had gone off by accident, then there was a gunshot inside that apartment in the dead of night. A neighbor, across the way, heard it clearly enough to wake up and call 911. So how? The prosecutor asked. Did the husband, lying right there beside her, feet away, in the same bed, not hear the one thing a stranger across the street heard through the walls? You cannot be close enough to be the grieving witness and far enough away to have slept through the shot. Not both. And the prosecution asked the jury to notice which answer he reached for, on which detail and when. Because his memory, they argued, was strangely selective. He could recall the boxes, the phone, the screenshots, the exact mechanics of moving a body. But the trigger, the gun, where he even found it, on those, and only those, the memory went dark. Saria Hildabrand took the stand in his own defense. He said he wanted to clear up years of lies. He admitted the affair, he admitted the drinking, and then, in flat, unflinching detail, he admitted the cover-up. He described pulling his wife's body into the wheeled bin feet first, dragging her in by her legs because the bin stood higher than the bed. He described throwing the bloodied bedding in on top of her. He described driving to the shop for a mattress topper, then returning to the apartment and moving her again. He described lifting the manhole cover, lowering her into the storm drain, and setting the cover back into place before he walked away. He said he had even brought along a can of petrol, meaning to burn the bedding, and then decided against it. He called his own state in those hours emptiness, self-hatred, disgust. He said he knew, even as he did it, that what he was doing was monstrous, and he did it anyway, methodically, over the better part of a day, while a text in his wife's name told her workplace she'd simply called in sick. The prosecution pressed him on exactly that. If he had woken to find his wife dead, innocent of the shot, terrified and grief-stricken, why not call for help? Why not ring 911? Or her mother? Or anyone at all? Why buy a bin and a bottle of peroxide instead? His answers circled back to panic and shame. He was afraid, he said. He knew how it would look. And so, rather than pick up the phone, he picked up his wife's body. What he would not say was that he had killed her. And, this is the part that mattered most, he would not say that he hadn't. Asked directly, under cross-examination, whether he had pulled the trigger, he answered that he did not know. Asked whether he wanted the jury to believe his wife had fired the gun, he said it wasn't up to him what the jury believed. 2 witnesses framed him more sharply than any exhibit ever could. The first was his adoptive mother, Paula. She wept on the stand before the jury had even been brought in. She described a son who had been a role model to his younger brother, and who had never, in her experience, shown a violent temper. Then the prosecution made a single quiet observation on cross-examination. Across all the phone calls she had shared with her son since his arrest, he had never once spoken about missing his wife. Not one time. The second was a fellow soldier, a first sergeant named Toby Horry, who visited Zarius in jail after his arrest. They did not discuss the case, Horry said, until Zarius told him he had a message he wanted passed on. "I hope this thing isn't recording," he said, "because I did what I did." Horry, unsettled, glanced back at him. Zarius was grinning. The sergeant reported the comment to his chain of command. On the 25th of June 2026, after somewhere in the region of 9 to 10 hours of deliberation, the jury came back. They found Saria Hildabrand not guilty of murder in the first degree. They found him guilty of murder in the second degree, on 2 counts, and they found him guilty on 2 counts of tampering with physical evidence. The difference between first and second degree, in the end, came down to premeditation. The jury was not persuaded he had planned it in advance, but they were certain he had killed her. He stood and absorbed the verdicts with almost nothing on his face. The same flat calm he had worn on the surveillance footage, the same calm he had worn in the search party and on the witness stand. He faces a sentence of 15 to 99 years in prison. He is due to be sentenced on the 23rd of October 2026. Among all the exhibits laid before that jury, one was almost unbearable in its smallness. On Saria's own phone, detectives found a note she'd written back in April, months before she died. It was not about violence, and it was not about fear. It was a quiet little inventory of feeling unloved, that he didn't call her pretty anymore, that he wasn't as affectionate, that he simply wasn't the same as he used to be. A young wife, trying to put words to something that had gone cold between them, with no idea at all how the story would end. She should have had decades to fill that phone with other notes. She had trained to save lives, twice over. She rang her mother on dog walks. She bought decorations for a party and she counted down to a family visit that arrived, instead, as a funeral in Mount Pleasant, Utah, less than 9 months after her wedding day. Her mother refused to let her vanish twice. Meredith Barney flew up from Utah for hearing after hearing across nearly 3 years, sitting in that courtroom, so that everyone in it would keep seeing a daughter and not a case file. She said she only wanted people to know how amazing her daughter was, and that hearing how many lives Saria had touched brought a comfort to her heart. So let that be the thing that lasts. Not the drone, not the drain, not the receipts, and not the man who shared a flyer for a wife he had already hidden. Let it be the medic from a small town in Utah who spent her whole short life moving towards the people who needed her most. Please don't forget Saria Hildabrand.